Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Tech Gamers World. In this video, I'm going to show you how you can quickly and easily configure any flight stick for use with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. So stay tuned, we'll be right back. Let's do this. Okay everyone, welcome back. So as I said in the introduction to this video, I'm going to show you here how you can pretty quickly and easily configure a flight stick for use with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 for both airplanes and helicopters. So let's get to it. So Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 is available on Microsoft Windows PC, Sony PlayStation 5, and Xbox Series X and S. Now, in order to use a flight stick with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, it's worth noting that the game must be fully installed. Microsoft Cloud Gaming is not supported with any flight stick, so the game must be downloaded and fully installed to work across all systems with any flight stick. That is super important to know. So this is, again, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. This is being demonstrated on a Microsoft Xbox Series X, but the principle is all the same across Microsoft Windows PC and Sony PlayStation 5. Here I have a Thrustmaster T.Flight HOTAS 1 flight stick, but what you're going to see here applies to any flight stick that is supported with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. So let's get to it. So I've gone ahead here and connected my Thrustmaster T-Flight HOTAS 1 flight stick to my Microsoft Xbox via the included USB cable. Now we are ready to get this configuration going. So once the game is fully loaded up, what I want you to do is go up into the settings. You're then going to navigate over to controls. Now here you will see the controls for both a controller, a keyboard and mouse, or your attached flight stick. So like I said, this is a Thrustmaster T-Flight HOTAS 1, and it is connected. Now you will know when the device is visible if it shows up under the devices list. Now, if you were doing this on a Microsoft Windows PC and you don't see your flight stick or it shows up generic flight stick, that probably means you either A, haven't connected it, or B, you don't have the drivers installed for the specific flight stick. So go ahead and verify those two things, and the device should show up. Now, some flight sticks, such as this one, actually have a switch on it that allow you to change between the systems that you're using it for. So in this case, the Thrustmaster T-Flight HOTAS 1 has a switch for Xbox and PC. Because I'm demonstrating this on a Xbox, I have the switch set for Xbox. Now that is not all flight sticks, but this particular one supports multiple systems. So they have a switch for the different systems, PC and Xbox. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do here is check out how to configure your flight stick for fixed wing airplanes. So we're going to start with that. So let's take a look at the control screen here. So here you see a bunch of things. You see devices list, controller presets configuration, and categories. Now, our current plane is the Airbus A320neo. These controls that I'm going to show you can apply to any fixed wing aircraft. So whatever aircraft you select, it really doesn't matter. I happen to have an Airbus A320neo because it happens to be one of my favorites to fly. So under the devices list, you see a controller and a T-Flight HOTAS 1. Like I said, if you were playing this on a PC, you probably would see a keyboard and mouse instead of a controller. So what we want to do is move down and select the Thrustmaster T-Flight HOTAS 1 or whichever flight stick you are using. Now, let's talk here a little bit about preset configs, airplanes controls, and specific plane controls. Now, general controls are just what it says. When you plug in a flight stick, Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 creates a profile for that flight stick. and it applies general controls for that flight stick. Most of the time, they're okay. A lot of the times, it may not work. My recommendation always is to create your own profile from scratch, which is essentially what I'm going to show you here. So again, my recommendation is to go down to Airplanes Controls, and you see here it says T.Flight HOTAS Airplane Profile. Now I created this profile for demonstrative purposes just to show you the flight controls and configurations. But if you go over to the little settings here and go to create, you can create yourself a brand new profile from scratch. You can also duplicate a profile, rename a profile, and apply that profile to all airplanes. You can also export and import profiles if you are doing this game on a Microsoft Windows PC. Export and import is not supported on Microsoft Xbox or Sony PlayStation in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 as of the making of this video. So we're going to pretend we've gone ahead and created a new profile. I call it T-Flight HOTAS Airplane Profile. Beautiful. Now you'll see that there. So now what we need to do is to configure all of our actions and bindings. So if we navigate over to the control section, you have a couple of things on the top here. You have a search field, you have a search by input, and then drop down here for essentially filters. So the search field is exactly what it says it is. If I want to search for flaps, I can go ahead and search for flaps. And what'll happen is when I go ahead and search, it will show up all of these settings and configurations related to flaps. And you can get very granular. You can search decrease flaps, increase flaps, retract flaps, whatever you want. If you're looking for a specific binding, that's the way to find it. So I'm going to go ahead here and clear that filter. Now, search by input is the same thing. If you want to search by a specific input you've already programmed in to your flight stick, you go ahead and hit search by input. I'm going to go ahead here on my flight stick and press next. Now it's going to show you all bindings and connections for that button I pressed. So in this case, toggle throttle reverse thrust, and we'll get to that in a second. If you have duplicate bindings, this is the way to find them. By searching by input, it will show you all of your bindings. And if you have a duplicate, you can go ahead and fix that. So let's go ahead and clear that as well. And then if you go to all, you have a bunch of drop downs here, essentially filters, essential, assigned, digital, access, analog, general, aircraft category, specific. You can filter by things. So if I wanted to view all of my assigned bindings, here is all of my assigned bindings for my particular flight stick. Pretty straightforward. We're going to go ahead and switch this back to all. So now let's get into the specific configurations for a flight stick here. So what we're going to do is go ahead and go through each of the categories for both aircraft and helicopters. And I won't go through all of the specific drop downs, only the ones that I use for my particular flight stick. But of course, you can bind whatever you want to your flight stick, presuming you have the buttons and bindings available. So let's go ahead here and start with radio. Now, again, this is only for demonstrative purposes. You can bind however you like. I'm giving you my recommendations for what works for me. So let's go into radio here just to show you. Here is all of the subcategories for radio. Now, because I don't bind any radio functions to my flight stick, there's nothing in here that's a specific configuration for my flight stick. Though I do bind some of the radio stuff to my controller or my keyboard and mouse, such as basic aircraft control, navigation, talking to the tower, etc. It's all a personal preference. I recommend you go through each one of these. Now, let's go ahead and move on to flight control surfaces. This is where I do start binding stuff to my flight stick. So let's go ahead here and start with control trimming surfaces. Now, Let's go ahead here and move down through. You see all of these are blank. That is because they are not bound to anything on my flight stick. The first ones that are bound are elevator trim down and elevator trim up. That is essentially up and down. So I've gone ahead and bound that to my joystick. So I'll show you here how to rebind something. So let's say that you have it bound to joystick axis 3, which is forward and back, and you don't like that. You just have to hit X, unbind. Now it's blank under elevator trim up. Let's go ahead here and get it so that I can bind it to my flight stick. So in any one of the blank spots, go ahead and just press A or enter on it. And now you're going to see it says scanning. So it's waiting for an input. So we want to do nose up, which on our flight stick is to pull back. So there we have joystick axis 3 is now bound to elevator trim up. That's how you bind a setting or a button to a control in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, and that applies to airplanes or helicopters. So let's go ahead and keep moving down here. We see all of the various other flight control surfaces. Now let's go into secondary controls. Moving down here, we see flaps, decrease flaps, increase flaps. My recommendation here is that you bind your flight stick to decrease flaps and increase flaps. Now, you can get very granular and define flaps 1, 2, 3, and 4, which are the degrees, essentially the settings. It's usually 15, 30, 45, 60, something like that, depending on the type of plane. I don't do that. My recommendation is decrease flaps, increase flaps. And in this case, I have bound the flap controls to the buttons on the outside here of the throttle here. So right there, B1 and B4, B3 and B4, sorry about that. So that's where I bind the flaps. Again, all a personal preference. Again, every flight stick will, of course, be different, but the principle applies. Decrease and increase flaps so that you have that granular control over how long you want the flaps to be extended, how far out. You can do things like retract flaps, spoilers, stuff like that. I personally don't use any of those with the flight stick. Primary control surfaces, again, here more about control. So moving down through rudder access, super important here, left to right. So joystick access 2 is left right for the rudder. Ailerons access, elevator access, as you can see, there, they are bound to joystick axis 4 and 3. So elevator is up and down, ailerons is left and right, rudder is turning the flight stick, just like that. Gyroscope control is nothing I bind to the flight stick. Going down to lights, I don't bind any flight stick controls to the lights. Though you could bind things like landing lights, taxi lights, etc., if you'd like, to your flight stick. I personally don't. I bind the shortcuts on the keyboard for those so that when you're coming in for landing, you can just, press it and turn them on. Same thing, you could do it on the controller if you wanted to. It's all a personal preference. Instruments and systems. Here we've got a whole bunch of various instruments and systems for your aircraft. So you can bind whatever you'd like to your flight stick, if you'd like. The only ones I really do is tail hook. So toggle tail hook if you're doing stuff like that for flying, if you have a tail hook. Um, Wings fold, not really. I sometimes do, depending on the types of plane you're flying. Most of these I just leave as the default. Moving down to autopilot. Now here is where I do bind some things. Airspeed, I don't particularly use airspeed or altitude. Moving down here through altitude, approach, attitude, back course, flight level change, just to show you the various autopilots available because I do think that they are super important. Localizer, Mach, which is essentially, if you're going faster than the speed of sound in a fighter jet. General, toggle autopilot master, autopilot on, autopilot off. You have a whole slew of different autopilot settings available here. My recommendation is if you are someone who uses autopilot a lot, you could set up your autopilot on, autopilot off, and bind it to a button on your flight stick. Same thing for altitude hold, speed hold is super important. It all depends on what your comfort level and your ability to fly is. If you like to fly just by manual, you won't touch autopilot. But if you're somebody who uses autopilot a lot, then definitely bind it to your flight stick. My recommendations are basic autopilot, altitude hold, and heading hold are always good. The rest, most of the time, you won't use. Um, I do recommend that if you do use auto throttle, be very careful with that. It can be very difficult to land if you forget that it's on, because as you come down to the ground, the throttle can change based on what the autopilot thinks you're doing, and sometimes it will not turn off. So pretty important to remember there. So that is autopilot settings. Brakes are super important. I don't typically use auto brake or parking brake bound to flight stick. In the case of the Xbox, the parking brake is set for one of the analog buttons already. The controls, the joystick controls there. Brakes. I do bind my flight stick to the brakes. Now, very important here, you have two options with the brakes. You have the left brake axis, the right brake axis, the left brake, right brake. I don't use those. I use just brakes. And I bind it to B2 on the flight stick, and it's also bound to the controller. So when you land, B2. If you have rudder pedals, you would just use both rudder pedals at the same time. If you do have rudder pedals and you do want those individual brakes, you can do left brake, right brake. Just be very careful. It can send your plane the way you're not thinking it's going to do. So if you just do brakes and bind them to one button, such as B2, when you touch down on a runway, you can just hold B2 and it will slow the plane down and keep you straight because all brakes are being applied at the same time. Super important thing to remember there. Power management, super important. Here we go. So condition levers, I don't usually bind any condition levers to my flight stick. Mixture, I don't usually either. I don't particularly mess around with the mixture. If you're not familiar with how mixture works on propeller planes, I recommend just leaving that auto mixture turned on in the settings of Flight Simulator and letting it do it for you. If you are familiar with how mixtures work, you know you're better off using the controller or the keyboard and mouse to adjust your mixtures based on the stuff inside of the cockpit, depending on altitude, weather, stuff like that. Propeller, propeller access, all this stuff, I generally do not touch or use with a flight stick. And very important, throttle, probably one of the most important things in Microsoft Flight Simulator because that's what keeps you flying. So as you can see here, here is the throttle settings. Now there are numerous throttle settings. You have all 10% to 90% in 10% increments. I don't use any of those with the flight stick. I just use throttle access. Now this is very important. Microsoft Flight Simulator does something really weird and it's random across the different flight sticks. It inverts the access of the throttle. So by that, I mean 0 is 100%. 100% is 0 in some cases. What I've had to do is go into the settings here and do what's called set inverted access. So let me show you that here. As you can see, watch this. If I throttle up, current access value goes to 100%, right? Microsoft Flight Simulator is defaulted to this, where down is 100%, up is 0. That to me is just weird. In all the patches and all the world updates, they have still not fixed this. So my recommendation, set inverted access so that you get 0 to 100%. That's my personal preference and probably almost everybody else's too. Again, if you want it reversed, just turn off set inverted access. I don't know why it's like that. I've reached out to Microsoft Flight Simulator on various social media forums. Their public handles, they've never responded. So I don't know. That's just like that. Moving on, I also set toggle throttle reverse thrust, very important when you are landing airplanes. I bind a button here so that, let's say it's next. When I touch down, I press next, and if the plane supports reverse thrust, such as jumbo jets, business class jets, etc., you can go ahead and hit reverse thrust. It will reverse the thrust and help you slow down while you're landing. And then when you're done, you just press reverse thrust again, and you are back to normal. Very important to help you land. Continuing along here, as you can see, I don't mess with anything else, really. That is all of the throttle settings. So we have landing gear here, wheel steering, I don't generally touch. Gears, the only one I do is toggle landing gear. So I assign a landing gear button to button B, which is right here on my flight stick. Press that, the landing gear will come up and down. Super straightforward. It's also defaulted on the flight stick, or the controller. Let's go ahead now and continue on to tools. Here are various other tools. These are mostly for things related to Flight Simulator that have nothing to do with actual flying, more so about auto start, stop, night vision, etc. I do recommend binding auto start engine to a button on either your flight stick or your controller, one of the two. It does make starting up the plane that much easier if you don't like to follow checklists and manually start the plane. Aside from that, I don't really bind anything else. Same thing for any of these. They have all here assistances, checklist. There's a ton of them here. This is all mostly stuff um, just to help you out while flying. If you like to display a map, that's sometimes a good one. You can set it to the flight stick or the controller or keyboard and mouse, depending on your preference. Multiplayer, bunch of stuff here for multiplayer, nothing you would really bind to a flight stick. Communications, again, if you like to use radio, if you're playing multiplayer, you can bind the talk button, radio button to a button on your flight stick, all totally optional. Liquid drop system, if you were flying in a plane that has the ability to drop water, if you're doing a mission, stuff like that, you can go ahead and bind stuff to your flight stick. I recommend if you're going to do this, create a specific airplane controls for that, and then you can use that when you fly so that you are not using up all your bindings for something you won't be using if you're not flying that aircraft. Camera, this is super important. We have cockpit camera here, motion control, cockpit camera. So obviously you can see here, you've got your ability to cockpit quick view up, rear, right, left. I bind these to the point of view hat on the top here so that you can look up, down, left, right in the cockpit. Super important, especially while, flying, landing, taking off. Taxiing is a good one. Yeah, there's a ton of custom settings here. External camera, reset external view, super important while you're flying externally. If you want to get back behind the plane, I bind it to F2, which is right there. Same thing here for the quick views. So we have left, rear, right, top. So you use POV. So right, left, down, up. Super good, helpful when flying. A ton of other views here. You've got fixed camera views. I don't really use any of these, to be honest. You've got all kinds of stuff here. Smart view camera, saloon mode, camera mode. I don't really use any of those except for external views and left, right, top, down, POV views. That's really all I use. Moving on here to menu, nothing here you would really use with a flight stick. I would recommend any menu stuff, control or keyboard or mouse. VR stuff here, nothing I'd really use. Cockpit, same thing. Skydive system. Skydiving is a lot of fun. If you've never done it before, I definitely recommend trying it. And that is it for fixed wing aircraft. Let's go ahead here and move on to helicopters. So to get to helicopters, you want to go ahead and change aircraft. So we're going to go ahead and press Y and then move over to helicopter. Now, configuring a helicopter is essentially the same thing as configuring a aircraft. Just obviously there are some different settings and configurations that become available. So we've gone ahead and selected the gimbal Cavalry G2, one of my favorite helicopters to fly. It's very easy, very streamlined, entry-level helicopter. You see here the presets. So we have the same general controls. We have the helicopter controls. Now you'll notice compared to the airplane one, T.Flight HOTAS helicopter profile is now showing because I did the same thing. I created a profile specific for helicopters and I configured it from scratch. So same thing here. You've got your search field, your search by input, and your filtering. We're going to go ahead and go through the settings here. So we'll skip radio because the same as before. I don't bind any radio stuff to my flight stick. Flight control surfaces. We have control trimming surfaces here. So again, you want to go through down here, set any of the ones you want. My recommendations are to set these four. Decrease rotor lateral trim, increase rotor lateral trim, decrease rotor longitudinal trim, and increase rotor longitudinal trim, all about precision flying. And you can do that with the point of view hat. Secondary control surfaces, we've got here obviously flaps, spoilers, stuff like that, stuff that really doesn't necessarily apply to helicopters, but they have it anyway. Primary control surfaces, here, the same. I recommend leaving all of these just by off, but I do recommend that you set cyclic lateral axis, set cyclic longitudinal axis, tail rotor axis. Again, all about precision flying. Gyroscope control, same thing as airplanes, leave off. Lights, same thing. I don't bind any lights to my flight stick. Instruments and systems, electrics, anti-ice. I don't really bind anything for any of these to my flight stick. You certainly can, same as on airplane. Moving on, autopilot. Autopilot is super important for helicopters. It makes life so much easier. So I bind things like toggle autopilot altitude hold to my flight stick for a helicopter because it'll help you a lot. Flying a helicopter is a whole different animal than flying in an aircraft. So autopilot can be your best friend. So I do things like altitude. I'll show you here what else I do. Approach. I don't really do approach. Attitude. You can do if you want. Back course. You can see here. I'm just going through flight level change, heading. I do heading because it's super important, especially when you're flying in a helicopter. It can veer. They're different than airplanes. So I toggle autopilot heading on and off. Mach, I don't really do. Autopilot master, the same thing. I bind that to the flight stick. And that's pretty much it. That auto throttle you could do if you want to. Again, be very careful with that. If you're going to come into land and auto throttle is still on, it can make landing difficult to impossible. Speed, same thing for vertical speed. Again, being careful with these because when autopilot's on, if you forget, it causes problems. Flight director, I don't do any of that stuff. Yaw dampener, I don't do any of that. Those are the basics there for throttle. Brakes, the same thing as the airplanes. Some of the helicopters do have brakes, so I bind a button on the flight stick to brakes. Just to show you again here how to adjust binding. So if you want to, let's say that brakes, oops, sorry about that. Let's go back here to helicopter and brakes. Let's say that brakes are not bound. Let's go ahead and bind the brakes. So we'll hit that, hit scanning, press F2 on the flight stick for brakes. There we have our brakes bound. And then we can go ahead and continue on to power management. This is super important for helicopters. This is how you stay in the air. Condition levers, I don't really bind much to that. Mixture, the same thing. I prefer just to leave auto mixture on in the settings unless you're really an expert, especially with helicopters. The same thing with mixture there. Propeller, you can set your propeller accesses, your pitch, all that stuff if you want to use the flight stick for it or the controller or keyboard and mouse. Throttle. Now, throttle is a little different on a helicopter. Obviously, of course, we get our throttle from something called the collective, not the actual throttle. So very important. You do not want to bind your flight stick throttle to anything related to throttle on your helicopters. You want to use the collective. So the collective here. And you'll see if we do the same thing, we go into the settings, you'll see that the set invert access is set for the collective. Collective is essentially throttle for the helicopter. Rotor clutch, if you want to control the rotor spin. Landing gear, same thing. Some of the helicopters have landing gear, so toggle landing gear. Tools, same thing as before. We don't generally bind anything for tools. What else do we have here? Multiplayer, the same thing. I don't really bind anything for multiplayer. Communications, same thing, and radio stuff. Liquid drop system, the same thing. Again, if you're flying in a helicopter that can drop water for any of those missions, you can bind it to your flight stick. Cameras, same thing as the airplane. I'll show you here. Cockpit camera, you can bind whatever you want to the looks. So we have your quick views. You've got your cockpit view upper and lower, depending on what you like. I prefer when I fly a helicopter to be able to look up and down. So you can do cockpit view upper. So that's important if you're, trying to get your bearings. You can bind that to whatever. I don't know. It's all personal preference. As you can see, we've got all kind of the same views as airplanes. My recommendation when you're having the helicopter is previous pilot position, next pilot position, bind those to the POV hat. That can make you move seats, makes landing that much easier, especially when you're doing those precision landings and missions, rescue missions, etc. External camera, same deal as with the aircraft. You've got your POV views and your free views, all that stuff, fixed camera, etc. You could set all these bindings, same exactly thing as the fixed wing aircraft. Menu, the same thing as the aircraft. Nothing I set under menu, VR, cockpit. If you want, again, cockpit interactions. I didn't show you these on the aircraft, but you can set it to do different things, interact, stuff like that. Again, I don't really use any of these. Player character. I didn't show you this on the aircraft one. Same thing, camera. You can make it look free looks, more free looks, stuff like that. Be very careful if you use any of the player character bindings. It can mess up your points of view pretty bad. Actually, I tend to just leave all those alone. And then again, specific helicopter flight controls. So that's it. I walked you through here how to configure a flight stick for both fixed wing airplanes and helicopters in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. A couple important notes. Again, the flight stick you're using must be supported with both Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 and the system that you are playing on. If you're doing any use of flight sticks on a Microsoft Windows PC, absolutely make sure that the latest general release drivers and firmware are installed on the system and the device, especially the firmware is up to date before use with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024. If you're using it on cloud gaming, flight sticks are not supported. If you try it, you will not see the flight stick. So the game must be fully downloaded and installed. If anyone needs any help with Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024 configurations for both airplane and helicopters, definitely drop a comment down below and I will do my best to help you out. I will go ahead and put in the comment section of this video all the configurations for the flight sticks for both fixed wing airplanes and helicopters so that you can take a look and use them to apply to your own configurations. So that's it. Hope everybody enjoyed this video. As always, thanks for stopping by and hanging out. please click that like button. Follow, subscribe to me here at Tech Gamers World. That would be totally awesome. And I will see you around. Keep on gaming.